Tonight you will hear stories that monks and teachers have told for a long time. Each story shows a way of seeing that brings a natural peace. This isn't a peace you have to try hard to make or keep up, but a peace that shows up when you stop doing the things that mess up your natural calm. Before we start, please feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. Zen is often thought of as something magical or hard, but at its most basic, Zen is amazingly simple. It teaches us to see things clearly, to let go of what we don't need, and to rest in the way things really are instead of how we wish they were. As you listen tonight, there is nothing you need to remember or try to achieve. The stories will work on you in their own way, like rain soaking into dirt. Let yourself be comfortable. Now, feel the surface beneath you holding up your body. Notice your breath moving naturally without needing to make it do anything. Relax. Take a slow, deep breath and let's begin our trip together. There is a teaching in Zen that sounds mixed up at first. The teaching says that true smartness comes from not knowing. We spend our lives trying to know more, to understand better, to figure things out. We think that knowing brings peace and that not knowing brings sadness. But Zen suggests something different. Sometimes our knowing gets in the way. Sometimes the smartest answer is simply, I do not know. When we think we know something completely, our mind closes. We stop looking carefully because we believe we have already seen everything there is to see. We stop listening carefully because we think we have already heard what the other person will say. We stop being present because we are busy comparing what is happening now to our old ideas about how things are supposed to be. Not knowing keeps the mind open and awake. It lets us see what is actually here instead of what we expect to be here. It makes room for wisdom to show up naturally instead of forcing answers based on old habits. Let's look at a story that shows this teaching in action. In a farming village at the edge of a wide valley, there lived two men who were as different as could be. The first was named Hayato, and he had studied farming at a famous school in the big city. He had read all the important books about soil and crops and weather. He knew the science names of hundreds of plants. He could explain the way chemicals in plant food work and the right way to grow different crops based on the newest ideas. Hayato had come back to his home village full of knowledge and excited to fix the old farming ways he saw there. He would walk through the fields giving advice to the older farmers, explaining how their old ways were wasteful and how modern scientific methods would grow more crops. The second man was named Dai, and he had never been to school at all. He could not read or write. He had spent his entire life working in the fields with his hands. He knew the land because he touched it every day, smelled it, watched it through all seasons and weather. He knew what it needed, not from books, but from many years of paying attention. When Hayato first came back to the village, he went to watch Dai's fields. The old farmer was getting ready to plant rice, and Hayato watched him work for a while before speaking. "Excuse me, uncle," Hayato said, using the polite word for an older person. "I noticed you are not getting the soil ready according to the proper method. You should be mixing in this type of plant food at this depth to have the most nitrogen and make sure the plants grow best." Dai stopped his work and looked at the young man with quiet attention. "What do you think the soil needs?" he asked. "I just told you. The nitrogen levels need to be increased to 14 parts per thousand, and the acid balance should be between 6 and 7 for rice to grow." "I see," Dai said. "And how do you know what this particular soil needs right now?" "I learned it from Professor Tanaka, who studied farming for 30 years and wrote the main book on rice farming," Hayato said with sure confidence. Dai nodded slowly. He bent down and picked up a handful of soil, crumbling it between his fingers, smelling it, even tasting a tiny bit. Then he let it fall back to the ground. "This soil," he said quietly, "is not the same as the soil in Professor Tanaka's book. This soil has a special clay mix from the river that floods here each spring. It holds water in a certain way. The winter was cold this year, which changes things. Last season we grew barley here, which left certain conditions. All of these things matter, but the rules of soil chemistry are the same everywhere, Hayato insisted. Science applies everywhere. Maybe so, Dai said, but I do not know about rules that are the same everywhere. I only know about this specific patch of earth right here, and I do not fully know it either. Every year it teaches me something new. Every season I learn that I understood less than I thought. Hayato felt frustrated with what he saw as the old man's lack of knowledge. He continued walking through the village, giving advice based on his schooling. Some of the younger farmers tried his methods, impressed by how sure he was and his modern knowledge. That spring, Hayato planted his own family's fields using all the newest ways he had learned. He figured out the exact amounts of plant food, followed the suggested planting depths exactly, and spaced his crops according to the best patterns described in his textbooks. Everything was done by the numbers, scientifically correct. Dai, meanwhile, planted his fields as he always did. He could not have explained his methods using science words. He simply paid attention to what the land was telling him, adjusting his approach based on how the soil felt and smelled, how the early rains came, how the air temperature changed from day to day. By early summer, it became clear that something was wrong in Hayato's fields. His rice was growing, but not as strongly as he expected. Some areas were turning yellow. Others showed signs of sickness. He checked his books and calculations again and again. Everything should have been perfect according to the scientific rules. Meanwhile, Dai's rice was growing very well, deep green and healthy. Hayato swallowed his pride and went to watch the old farmer's fields more carefully. I do not understand, he finally admitted. I followed all the proper methods. I did everything according to the research, but my rice struggles while yours grows so well. Dai invited him to sit at the edge of the field. Tell me, he said, when you prepared your soil, what did you notice about it? I measured the acid levels and figured out the nitrogen content based on the previous crop. But what did you notice? How did the soil feel in your hands? Did you watch how water moved through it? Did you pay attention to which areas were different from other areas? Hayato realized he had not done any of those things. He had treated his entire field as one thing, using the same recipes everywhere. He had been so focused on his knowledge that he had not actually looked at what was in front of him. The problem with knowing too much, Dai said gently, is that you stop seeing what is actually here. You see only your ideas about what should be here. You think the soil should be a certain way because a book told you so, and you miss what the soil is actually telling you right now. Over the following weeks, Hayato began to spend time with Dai, learning to observe rather than just use recipes. The old farmer would pick up soil and invite Hayato to feel it, to notice small differences between handfuls from different spots. He would point out tiny details about how water stayed in certain areas, how the color of the earth changed, how some sections had more stones mixed in. I do not know if what I am showing you is scientifically correct, Dai would say. Maybe your professor would say I am doing things wrong. But I know this land not from books, but from years of paying attention. And still, I know I do not fully understand it. Every season surprises me with something new. Hayato began to understand what the Zen teaching of not knowing meant. It was not about being dumb or saying that knowledge was bad. It was about not letting your knowledge stop your ability to see clearly what is actually in front of you. It was about staying humble and open, realizing that real situations are always more complicated than our ideas about them. By the end of that season, Hayato had learned more from Dai's not knowing than he had learned from years of study. His fields improved as he started paying direct attention to what was actually happening, rather than just following textbook recipes. He still thought his schooling was important, but he held it more lightly as useful information rather than the only complete truth. When students from the farming school came to visit, eager to learn from the famous graduate, Hayato would tell them, Everything I learned in school is valuable, but the most important thing I learned after school is this: stay curious, stay humble. Do not let your knowledge convince you that you fully understand something. The wisest farmers I know say they are still learning after 50 years of work. They approach each season with the question, "What will this teach me?" That question is more valuable than all the answers I memorized. This story shows us how not knowing works in real life. Hayato had real knowledge from his schooling, but that knowledge became a wall when he thought it was complete and could be used without paying attention to specific conditions. Dai's not knowing was actually a deeper kind of wisdom because it kept him open and paying attention. The teaching of not knowing suggests that we hold our knowledge lightly as useful, but not finished. When we think we fully understand something, we stop learning. When we admit we do not know completely, we stay open to new information and deeper understanding. This brings a natural peace because it frees us from the tiring effort of trying to know everything and be right all the time. Not knowing lets us relax, to be uncertain without getting worried, to approach each situation with curiosity instead of being stuck in certainty. Take a gentle breath and notice how it feels to think that you do not need to have everything figured out. There is relief in admitting, "I do not know." It creates space for wisdom to show up freshly in each situation, rather than forcing old answers onto new questions. Let's explore another story that makes this teaching clearer from a different way, showing how not knowing connects to spiritual understanding itself. There was once a famous writer named Masao who had written 17 books about what being enlightened is like and how to practice Buddhism. He could remember and repeat whole parts of old books. He had studied with many teachers and could explain the small differences between different groups of Buddhist thought. When people had questions about quiet thinking, meditation, or spiritual growth, they would come to Masao because he always had detailed, smart answers. Masao traveled often to give talks at temples and universities. Everywhere he went, people were impressed by how much he knew and how well he explained things. He had built his whole feeling about himself around being someone who understood Buddhism deeply and could explain it clearly to others. One season, Masao was invited to speak at a temple in a far-off mountain area. The temple was small and unknown, but they were celebrating their start, and someone had suggested they invite a well-known scholar as part of the ceremony. Masao agreed, partly to be nice and partly because he enjoyed being recognized for his expertise. He made the long trip into the mountains, arriving tired and dusty at the simple temple. The monks greeted him politely and showed him to a simple room where he could rest before his talk. That evening, they gathered in the small teaching hall to hear him speak. Masao gave what he thought was one of his best lectures. He explained the history of Zen teachings, outlined the main rules of practice, described the steps of spiritual growth according to different masters, and offered detailed advice on meditation techniques. He spoke for nearly 2 hours, and the monks listened politely the whole time. When he finished, the head monk of the temple, an elderly monk named Kodo, thanked him for his visit and invited him to join them for the next morning's quiet thinking, meditation, before he left. Masao had not actually practiced meditation regularly in years. He was too busy studying about meditation, writing about it, and explaining it to others, but he could hardly say no to the abbot's invitation. So he agreed to join them. The next morning, well before the sun came up, a young monk knocked on Masao's door to wake him for meditation. Masao dressed in the dark and followed the monk to the meditation hall where about 20 monks were already seated in silent rows. Masao found a cushion and sat down, trying to remember the right way to sit he had described so well in his books. The hall was completely quiet except for occasional sounds from the forest outside. The monks sat still, and Masao tried to do the same. Almost immediately, his mind began wandering. He thought about his talk from the night before, wondering if the monks had truly understood his knowledge. He worried about the trip back down the mountain. He felt uncomfortable in the sitting position and kept moving slightly. His legs began to ache. He became aware of every small sound. He noticed himself thinking about meditation, which made him think about his theories about being aware of his thoughts, which led to a long chain of philosophical thoughts. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, Masao felt completely frustrated with himself. Here he was, an expert on meditation, and he could not sit still for even a short time without his mind running everywhere. All his knowledge about the right way to sit and the correct way to think seemed useless. He did not know how to actually meditate. He only knew how to talk about meditation. When the sitting time finally ended, the monks stood and quietly left the hall. Masao remained seated, feeling confused and humbled. The abbot Kodo came over and sat down beside him. "How was your meditation?" Kodo asked gently. Masao wanted to give a smart answer about the challenges of staying aware or the difficulty of working with thoughts, but something in the abbot's simple, direct question made him answer honestly instead. "It was terrible. My mind would not settle at all. I tried to use the methods I know about, but nothing worked. I felt like I do not actually know how to meditate, even though I have written books about it." Kodo nodded with what looked like satisfaction rather than disappointment. "Good," he said. Masao was surprised. "Good? What is good about it?" "You discovered something true," Kodo replied. "You discovered that knowing about something and knowing something directly are completely different. You can describe water perfectly using science words, but this is not the same as being thirsty and drinking water. You can explain meditation well, but this is not the same as sitting on a cushion with a restless mind and no idea what to do." The abbot stood up slowly, his old knees making small creaking sounds. "Your books and talks are probably quite good. I am sure they help many people understand Buddhist ideas. But ideas about Buddhism are not Buddhism itself. They are like maps of a country you have never actually visited." Masao felt his carefully built identity as an expert beginning to crumble. "Are you saying all my study has been worthless?" "Not worthless," Kodo said, "but incomplete. You have been collecting information about wisdom instead of cultivating wisdom itself. The not knowing you felt this morning when you could not control your mind. That is actually closer to real practice than all your sophisticated understanding." Over the following days, Kodo invited Masao to stay at the temple and actually practice rather than study about practice. At first, Masao resisted. He felt embarrassed to be a beginner at something he was supposedly an expert in. But gradually, he began to see that his embarrassment itself was the problem. His identity as someone who knew everything about Buddhism was stopping him from actually learning Buddhism. Kodo gave him the simplest possible instructions. Just sit and breathe. When your mind wanders, notice that it wandered and come back to breathing. You do not need to achieve anything or understand anything. Just be present with what is actually happening. This was harder for Masao than any smart study had ever been. His mind kept wanting to analyze what was happening, to fit his experience into categories he had read about, to evaluate whether he was doing it correctly. But Kodo kept bringing him back to direct experience. "Are you breathing right now?" the abbot would ask. "Yes." "Do you know you are breathing because you read it in a book or because you directly feel the breath moving?" "I feel it." "Good. Stay with that direct feeling. Let go of all your ideas about breath and meditation and enlightenment. Just feel this breath right now." Masao spent a month at that small temple, and it changed his entire understanding of what he had been studying for many years. He began to see that all his philosophical knowledge had been a way of avoiding direct encounter with his own mind. As long as he was thinking about practice, analyzing practice, explaining practice to others, he never had to actually face the raw, uncomfortable reality of sitting with himself. The not knowing that Kodo taught was not ignorance. It was a quality of openness and humility. It was the recognition that direct experience is always richer and more surprising than our ideas about experience. It was the willingness to say, "I do not fully understand this," even about things he had written books about. When Masao finally left the temple to return to his teaching, he was a different person. He still gave talks, but they were simpler and more honest. Instead of long philosophical explanations, he would often say, "I do not fully know the answer to that question. Let me share what I have experienced directly, and you can explore it yourself to see if it matches your experience." Students noticed the change. His talks became less impressive in a scholarly way, but much more helpful in a practical way. He spoke less from ideas and more from actual practice. He was more willing to admit when he did not know something, and this honesty made people trust him more, not less. Years later, when Masao wrote his 18th book, it was completely different from the previous 17. It was short and simple, mostly questions rather than answers. The title was "What I Do Not Know About Buddhism," and it became his most widely read work. In the introduction, he wrote, "I spent decades gathering knowledge about the Zen path, thinking this made me an expert. But real understanding began when I finally admitted I did not actually know how to practice. True wisdom, I discovered, lives in not knowing rather than in collecting information. When we admit we do not fully understand something, we become open to learning. When we think we already know, our mind closes and we stop seeing clearly." This story shows another dimension of not knowing. Masao had real learning and could explain Buddhist ideas correctly. But this knowledge of ideas was not the same as direct understanding. His not knowing was not about lacking information. It was about recognizing the difference between thinking about something and actually experiencing it. This teaching applies to much more than meditation or spiritual practice. How many things do we think we understand simply because we have heard about them or read about them? How much of what we call knowledge is actually just other people's experiences that we have memorized? True knowing comes from direct experience, and even then, we should hold our conclusions lightly, remaining open to deeper understanding. The teaching of not knowing also deals with our habit of wanting to be right. We build our self-image around what we know, what we understand, what we can explain to others. When someone questions our knowledge, we feel threatened because we think they are questioning our value as a person. But when we learn to rest in not knowing, we become free from this defensive habit. Not knowing is actually confident enough to be uncertain. It takes real strength to say, "I do not know." It takes wisdom to recognize that every situation is unique and cannot be fully understood through past experience alone. It takes humility to approach each moment with fresh curiosity, rather than assuming we already understand it. This teaching brings peace because it frees us from the tiring effort of trying to be an expert on everything. We do not need to have all the answers. We do not need to understand everything. We can meet life with openness and curiosity, willing to be surprised, willing to learn, willing to admit when we simply do not know. As you rest now in this understanding, notice any areas where you might be holding too tightly to being right or knowing completely. Feel what it is like to soften that grip, to allow some uncertainty, to rest in not knowing. This is not weakness, it is wisdom. The Zen teaching of not knowing points toward a basic truth about consciousness itself. The thinking mind loves to sort, explain, and create certainty. But life is always more complicated than our thoughts about it. When we can rest in awareness without needing to understand everything, we find a deeper peace than any amount of knowledge could provide. Let this teaching continue to work in you over time. You might find yourself saying, "I do not know," more often. You might find yourself more willing to learn from unexpected sources. You might discover that questions are sometimes more valuable than answers, and that not knowing opens more doors than knowing closes. This is the gift of the Zen teaching on not knowing. It frees us from the burden of pretending to understand everything. It allows us to meet each moment fresh. It keeps us humble and curious. And in that openness, wisdom arises naturally, not from stored information, but from direct, clear seeing of what is actually here. There is a famous teaching in Zen about the gateless gate. It sounds like a riddle at first. How can a gate have no gate? But this strange idea points to something essential about how Zen practice and becoming awake works. We often think of spiritual growth as a trip from one place to another. We are here, not enlightened and struggling. We need to get there, to enlightenment and peace. And between here and there must be some kind of pathway, some gate we need to find and walk through. So we search for the gate. We study teachings, looking for the secret password. We practice methods, hoping to discover the hidden entrance. We compare ourselves to others, wondering if they have found the gate while we are still lost outside. But Zen teaches something that sounds impossible at first. There is no gate to pass through because there is no outside and inside. There is nowhere to go because you are already where you need to be. The separation between your current state and the peace you seek is created entirely by your mind. The gate is gateless because it never existed except as an idea. Let's explore a story that makes this strange idea clearer. In a remote mountain region, there lived a monk named Xuan who had heard of a legendary temple called the Temple of Direct Seeing. According to the stories told by traveling monks, this temple held the purest teachings of Zen. The masters there could give awakening directly, mind to mind, without needing years of hard practice. Any sincere seeker who found the Temple of Direct Seeing would immediately understand their true nature and find freedom. Xuan became obsessed with the desire to find this temple. He had practiced quiet thinking, meditation, for 5 years at his home monastery. But his mind still felt cloudy and restless. He had studied the old texts, but the words seemed like descriptions of something he could not quite grasp. He felt certain that if he could only find the Temple of Direct Seeing, everything would finally become clear. He went to his teacher and asked permission to leave the monastery to search for this legendary place. His teacher looked at him with an expression Xuan could not quite read. Sadness, perhaps, or maybe amusement. "If you feel you must search," the teacher said, "then search. But remember that I cannot stop you from leaving, and I cannot prevent you from returning." Xuan packed a small bag with basic supplies and set out on foot. He had heard the temple was somewhere in the high mountains to the north, so he began walking in that direction. The first village he came to, he asked if anyone knew of the Temple of Direct Seeing. An old farmer shook his head. "I have lived here my whole life and never heard of such a place, but I have heard that there are many temples in the mountains beyond the next valley. Perhaps you will find what you seek there." Xuan thanked him and continued north. Days of walking brought him to the next valley where he asked again. A merchant told him, "I have traveled these mountains for 30 years selling cloth and rice. I know of many temples, but none by that name. However, I have heard rumors of a great teacher who lives on the eastern peak. Many seekers go there looking for wisdom." So, Xuan turned east and climbed for 3 days until he reached a temple on a high peak. The monks there were kind and offered him food and rest. When he asked about the Temple of Direct Seeing, they looked at each other with uncertain expressions. "We have not heard this name," the senior monk said, "but there is a hermit who lives in a cave to the west who is very wise. He might know." Xuan traveled west and found the hermit, but the old man only smiled and suggested he look in the southern forests where ancient temples were hidden among the trees. This pattern continued for months. Each person Xuan asked would send him in a new direction, with vague assurances that someone else might know, or that the temple he sought might be found if he just kept traveling a bit further. A full year passed this way. Xuan walked hundreds of miles through mountains and valleys, visiting dozens of temples and speaking with countless monks, teachers, and hermits. Each time he explained what he was searching for, people would nod thoughtfully and point him toward the next possible location. The Temple of Direct Seeing remained always just beyond the next mountain, just past the next forest, just a bit further than he had traveled so far. Xuan's body grew thin and strong from constant walking. His robes became worn and patched. His sandals had been replaced 3 times. He had seen beautiful country and met remarkable people. But the thing he was searching for remained as hard to find as it had been the day he left his home monastery. One evening, exhausted and with sore feet, Xuan found himself walking along a road that seemed strangely familiar. The bend of the river, the shape of the hills in the distance, the way the rice fields were set up in the valley below. As the sun began to set, he came around a bend and stopped suddenly. Before him stood his home monastery, the same gate he had walked through more than a year ago, the same wooden buildings with their curved roofs, the same old pine tree in the courtyard. He had somehow, through all his searching and travelling, walked in a great circle and returned to his starting place. Xuan felt a wave of despair wash over him. All that time, all that effort, all those miles, and he was back where he began. He had failed completely. He sat down heavily on a stone beside the road and put his head in his hands. As he sat there in defeat, his teacher came walking down the path from the monastery. The old man sat down beside Xuan without speaking. They watched the sunset together in silence. Finally, Xuan spoke. "I have searched for a year and travelled more miles than I can count. I have asked everyone I met. No one could tell me where to find the temple of direct seeing. And now I have walked in a circle back to where I started. I have wasted a year of my life." His teacher was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Tell me about your journey. What did you see?" Xuan was surprised by the question, but he began to describe his travels. He spoke of the mountains he had crossed, the valleys he had walked through, the temples he had visited. He described the kindness of strangers who had shared their food with him, the beauty of remote forests, the challenge of crossing flooded rivers, the peace of sleeping under stars. As he talked, something strange happened. He realized that he was describing the journey with a sense of appreciation rather than frustration. The year had been difficult, but it had also been rich with experience. He had learned to rely on his own strength. He had seen how people everywhere struggled with the same basic questions about life and meaning. He had discovered a capacity for patience he had not known he possessed. "Did you find the temple of direct seeing?" his teacher asked when Xuan finished his story. "No," Xuan admitted. "I do not think it exists." "Look around you," his teacher said gently. "Look at this monastery where you have returned. What is its purpose?" "To practice quiet thinking and study the teachings to help monks develop direct seeing into their true nature." "And what is its name?" Xuan looked at his teacher with widening eyes. The name of his home monastery, where he had lived for 5 years before leaving to search elsewhere, was Jikisho-ji, the Temple of Direct Seeing. "But," Xuan stammered, "if this is the temple I was searching for, why did everyone I met send me somewhere else? Why did no one tell me I was looking for my own monastery?" His teacher smiled. "What did people actually tell you? Think carefully." Xuan thought back through his many conversations. The farmer had said he had never heard of the temple, but that there were many temples in the mountains. The merchant had said he knew of no temple by that name, but mentioned a great teacher. Each person had been truthful. They did not know of the Temple of Direct Seeing because it was not called that in their region, but they had tried to help by pointing him toward other places where he might find teaching and wisdom. "I kept searching for something far away," Xuan said slowly, "when it was here all along. I walked past this gate a year ago, looking for some other gate somewhere else." "And now you have returned," his teacher said, "but you are not the same monk who left." That monk thought the gate to awakening must be somewhere else, somewhere special, somewhere he had not yet looked. This monk sitting beside me now knows something different. "What do I know?" Xuan asked. "You know that searching takes you away from what you seek. You know that the gate you were looking for was always right in front of you. You know that the journey itself was the teaching, not the destination." His teacher stood up and gestured toward the monastery gate. "This gate has always been open. It was never locked or hidden, but you could not walk through it until you understood that there was nowhere else you needed to go. The gateless gate is simply the recognition that you were never outside to begin with. You were always home. You just did not realize it yet. Xuan sat by the road until the stars came out, letting this understanding settle into him. He had traveled for a year looking for something that had been present all along. Not just the physical monastery, but the very thing the monastery stood for. The capacity for direct seeing, for awakening, for peace. It had been with him during every step of his journey. It was with him now. It had never been anywhere else, except right here in this moment of awareness, wherever he was. When he finally stood and walked through the gate of his monastery, it felt completely different than it had a year ago. It was the same wooden structure, the same hinges and posts. But now he understood. The gate was not a wall to pass through. It was simply a frame that showed him what had always been true. He was already inside. This story shows us the strange idea of the gateless gate. Xuan had to search in order to discover that searching was taking him away from what he sought. He had to travel far to realize he had never left home. Sometimes we need to wear ourselves out, looking elsewhere before we can recognize what has been present all along. The teaching here is not that we should never make efforts or practice diligently. Xuan's journey was not wasted. It taught him something essential, but the teaching asks us to look at our basic belief that peace and awakening are somewhere other than here, sometime other than now. What if the separation we feel is created entirely by our belief in separation? Take a gentle breath and notice this present moment. You are not outside of peace looking for a way in. The gateless gate means there is no outside. The peace you seek is the nature of awareness itself, which is present right now. As you hear these words, as you feel your body resting, as you breathe, let's explore another story that looks at this teaching from a different side, showing how we create walls that do not actually exist. There was once a young monk named Renzhen who came to study at a mountain monastery famous for its strict training. On his first day, after the long climb up the mountain path, Renzhen approached the monastery entrance. There he found a massive wooden gate elaborately carved with pictures of dragons and clouds. The gate was firmly closed and appeared to be locked with several heavy iron locks. Renzhen knocked on the gate. No one answered. He knocked again, louder. Still, no response. He called out, announcing that he had come to study and requesting entrance. The sound of his voice echoed off the mountain slopes, but no reply came from within the monastery walls. A small wooden sign beside the gate had writing painted on it in careful letters. Renzhen read it aloud. "Enter when you find the key. Seek, and you shall find the way." He understood this to be a test. Clearly, the monastery did not let people in easily. He would need to prove himself worthy by finding the key to this gate. Renzhen made camp beside the road and began his search. He examined every inch of the gate itself, looking for hidden spots that might contain a key. He searched the ground around the entrance, thinking perhaps the key had been deliberately dropped nearby. He climbed the trees that grew close to the walls, looking for anything hanging from branches. Days passed with no success. He began to think the key must be somewhere further away, hidden as part of the test. Perhaps he needed to climb to the mountain peak above the monastery. He spent 2 days climbing steep rocks and walking dangerous edges, searching caves and cracks, but found no key. Perhaps it was hidden in the valley below instead. He went down and searched the riverbank, checked old shrines, looked behind waterfalls. No key appeared. Weeks became months. Renzhen expanded his search across the entire mountain. He spoke with villagers in the valley below, asking if they knew anything about a key to the monastery gate. They looked at him strangely and said they knew nothing about any key. He met other travelers on the mountain paths and asked if they had seen anything that might unlock the great gate. They shook their heads and continued on their way. As time passed, Renzin began to feel desperate. He had come to this monastery because he heard it offered the deepest training. He had given up his position at his home temple, traveled for weeks to get here, and now he could not even get inside. The locked gate stood between him and the teaching he sought. The key remained hidden despite months of intense searching. One day, after a particularly frustrating morning of searching the same areas he had already checked dozens of times, Renzin sat down in exhaustion about 100 steps from the gate. He was dirty, tired, and discouraged. His robes were torn from climbing over rocks. His feet were blistered from constant walking. His mind was worn thin from the endless seeking. As he sat there, he noticed something he had never observed before. He had been so focused on the gate itself and on searching for the key that he had never really looked at the monastery walls that extended from either side of the gate. The walls were made of wood and stone, about twice the height of a person. They looked solid and well maintained. But as Renzin sat there with nothing else to do, he followed the line of the wall with his eyes. To the right. It extended about 50 steps and then turned a corner, following the natural shape of the mountainside. To the left. The wall ran about the same distance, before also turning out of sight. For the first time in months, Renzin stood and walked along the outside of the wall. He followed it to the right, around the corner, along the next section. The wall continued for a while, and then simply ended. There was no gate at the end, no wall, just an open space where anyone could walk directly onto the monastery grounds. Renzin stood at this opening completely still as understanding washed over him. He had spent months searching for a key to a locked gate while there had been an open entry the entire time. The wall was not continuous. The monastery was not sealed. He could have walked in at any moment, simply by walking around the wall. He made his way through the open section and found himself in the monastery garden. Buildings stood peacefully around a central courtyard. The gardens were simple, but beautiful. Everything looked calm and orderly. He saw no monks moving about, which he thought strange for such a supposedly busy training monastery. He walked to the main hall and entered, calling out a greeting. His voice echoed in the empty space. He moved through the monastery, checking the meditation hall, the sleeping quarters, the kitchen. Everything was clean and ready for use, but completely empty. There were no other monks here. There never had been. In the abbot's quarters, Renzin found a letter addressed simply to the one who enters. He opened it and read, "Welcome to the monastery. You have passed through the gateless gate. The true teaching begins not when you find the key, but when you realize no key was ever needed. The gate was never locked. The wall never enclosed us completely, but you could not see this while you were consumed with searching for what you believed you lacked. The monastery stands empty because it has already taught its lesson. If you came here believing that somewhere else, someone else held the key to your awakening, you have learned otherwise. The gate you stood before for months represents every wall we imagine stands between our current state and freedom. We study these walls, analyze them, develop long ideas about how to overcome them. We never think to simply walk around them because we are too convinced they are real. Zen practice is not about finding the right key to unlock your true nature. It is about recognizing that your true nature was never locked away. The barriers you experience are created entirely by your belief in barriers. The gate is gateless because there is no separation between you and what you seek. You may choose to stay here and practice, or you may leave and return to the world. But wherever you go, remember this. You are always, already on the inside. There is no outside. The gate you struggle to pass through exists only in your mind. Renzin sat with this letter for a long time. He had spent months searching for a key that did not exist, struggling to open a gate that was never locked, trying to pass through a wall that was largely imaginary. He could have walked around the wall on his first day if he had simply looked for another way instead of being focused on the obstacle in front of him. He thought about all the things in his life he approached the same way, problems he struggled with endlessly while never looking for other ways to solve them. Practices he thought were necessary gates to awakening, qualities he believed he needed to develop before he could be at peace. What if all of these were like the gate, What if he was creating the very walls he spent so much energy trying to overcome? Rinzin did stay at the monastery, but not because he thought he needed to be there to achieve something. He stayed because he found peace in the simple practice of sitting, walking, and tending the gardens without any goal beyond the activity itself. When he eventually left and returned to teaching, students would sometimes ask him about the key to awakening. He would smile and say, "There is no key because there is no lock. The gate you think you need to pass through is gateless. You are spending your life searching for a way in when you were never outside to begin with." This story shows another aspect of the gateless gate. Xuan had to search in order to discover that searching was taking him away from what he sought. He had to travel far to realize he had never left home. Sometimes we need to wear ourselves out looking elsewhere before we can recognize what has been present all along. The teaching here is not that effort and practice are useless. Both Xuan and Rinzin learned essential lessons through their struggles. But the teaching asks us to look carefully at our beliefs about what separates us from peace. Often we are creating the very separation we believe we need to overcome. This Zen teaching brings natural relief. If there is no gate to pass through, then you can stop exhausting yourself trying to find the key. If you are already inside, already home, already complete, then this moment right now is enough. You do not need to become someone different or achieve some special state before you can be at peace. This understanding naturally allows deeper rest because it removes the tension of constantly trying to get somewhere else. When you realize you have already arrived, the struggle dissolves. What remains is simple presence. And in that presence, peace shows itself as what has been here all along. In Zen, there is a teaching called beginner's mind. This is the quality of approaching life with fresh eyes, as if you are seeing things for the first time. A beginner's mind is open, curious, and free from the weight of old beliefs. An expert's mind, on the other hand, is often closed, certain, and trapped by everything it thinks it already knows. This might seem strange. We spend our lives trying to become experts, to know more, to master skills, and gather wisdom. Zen does not say these things are worthless, but it points to something surprising. Often, the more expert we become, the less clearly we see. Our expertise becomes a filter that colors everything, and we miss what is actually in front of us because we are so busy seeing what we expect to see. Let me share a story that makes this teaching clearer. In a place known for its warrior tradition, there lived an archer named Takashi who had reached the highest level possible in his skill. For 30 years, he had practiced the way of the bow. He could hit targets that other archers could not even see clearly. Students came from distant regions to study his technique, and military leaders sought his advice on training their soldiers. Takashi's form was considered perfect. Every movement had been perfected through decades of practice. He knew exactly how to stand, precisely how to breathe, the correct angle for his elbow, the perfect moment to release. He had studied every old book on archery and could repeat the rules of the ancient masters from memory. But something had begun to trouble Takashi. Lately, when he stood before the target, his mind would flood with thoughts. He would think about his stance, question his grip, worry about his breathing. Each shot required huge effort just to remember and do all the technical points he had gathered over the years. What had once felt natural and smooth now felt mechanical and forced. His accuracy began to suffer. Shots that he could once make without thinking now required intense effort and still missed their mark. The more he focused on perfecting his technique, the worse his shooting became. He would spend hours adjusting tiny details, trying to get back the ease he had once felt. But the target seemed to move further away with each attempt. One afternoon, after a particularly frustrating practice session, Takashi walked down to the river to clear his mind. He sat on the bank, watching the water flow, feeling defeated and confused. How could someone with such extensive knowledge and experience suddenly lose their ability? As he sat there, he heard laughter and splashing downstream. A group of village children were playing by the water, throwing flat stones to see who could make them skip the furthest across the surface. Takashi watched them without much thought at first, but then something caught his attention. One small boy, perhaps 7 years old, was making his stones skip with remarkable consistency. He would find a stone, look at the water briefly, and throw. Skip, skip, skip across the surface. No hesitation, no complicated preparation. Just a simple, smooth motion that sent stone after stone dancing across the river. Takashi watched more carefully. The boy was not thinking about the angle of his wrist, or the spin of the stone, or the perfect release point. He simply threw, and the stone skipped beautifully. When a stone sank instead of skipping, the boy would laugh, pick up another one, and try again without any sign of frustration or self-blame. Takashi found himself walking closer to watch. The boy noticed him and smiled. "Do you want to try?" he asked, offering Takashi a smooth stone. "I am actually an archer," Takashi said. "I have trained in accuracy for many years, but I have never learned to skip stones." "It is easy," the boy said. "You just throw them. Watch." He sent another stone dancing across the water. Takashi took the stone and prepared to throw it. Immediately, his mind began analyzing. What was the correct angle? How much force should he use? What was the ideal spinning motion? He stood there for several long moments, studying the stone in his hand, calculating the path. "You think too much," the boy said simply. "Just throw it and see what happens." Something in the child's directness cut through Takashi's analyzing mind. He threw the stone without thinking. It skipped once and sank. The boy laughed, not mockingly, but with pure enjoyment. "Try again." Takashi picked up another stone and threw it. This time, without the long preparation, it skipped twice, then 3 times. By the 5th stone, he was matching the boy's distances, and something remarkable was happening. He was not thinking about technique at all. He was simply seeing the water, feeling the stone, and throwing. They played together for nearly an hour, and Takashi felt something he had not experienced in months. Joy, ease, the simple pleasure of doing something without the burden of expertise weighing on every movement. When the children finally ran off to return to their homes, Takashi sat back down by the river. He understood something that all his years of study had not taught him. His expertise had become a cage. Every shot with his bow had become an opportunity to succeed or fail at executing perfect technique. He was no longer shooting arrows. He was performing a complicated mental checklist. The child had shown him something essential: beginner's mind. The boy did not know the best angle for skipping stones or the science of spin and speed. He simply threw stones and learned from what happened. He was free to respond directly to what he saw, because his mind was not cluttered with ideas about how it should be done. The next morning, Takashi went to his practice field before dawn. He looked at his bow and arrows as if seeing them for the first time. He tried to forget everything he knew, which was harder than learning everything had been. His hands wanted to grip the bow in the technically correct way. His body wanted to take the classical stance. His mind wanted to run through the checklist of proper form. Instead, he simply stood before the target and picked up the bow. He felt its weight. He placed an arrow and drew the string, paying attention only to what his body naturally wanted to do. Without thinking through the steps, he released. The arrow missed the center of the target, but something about the shot felt right in a way that his recent technically perfect attempts had not. He reached for another arrow, and this time he pretended he was the child by the river. No expertise, no pressure, just curiosity about what would happen. This arrow flew true and struck near the center. Takashi smiled, not because he had hit the target, but because he had remembered how to simply shoot. Over the following weeks, his accuracy returned and then surpassed his previous level. But more importantly, the joy of archery returned. Each shot became fresh and alive again, instead of being a mechanical execution of memorized technique. When students came to him now, Takashi taught them technique, but he also taught them something else. "Learn everything I teach you," he would say. "Practice until these movements become natural." But then you must forget what you have learned. You must find the place where knowledge and not knowing meet, where expertise does not block the simple direct action of the present moment. This story shows us something important about beginner's mind. It is not about being ignorant or untrained. Takashi did not throw away his 30 years of practice, but he learned to hold that expertise lightly, to use it without being trapped by it. When we become too certain about how things should be done, we lose our ability to respond naturally to what is actually happening right now. Zen teaches that this rule applies to everything in our lives, not just to specific skills like archery. We gather ideas about how relationships should work, how our jobs should go, how spiritual practice should feel. These accumulated ideas can become walls that stop us from seeing clearly what is actually in front of us. Beginner's mind is the quality of meeting each moment fresh without the heavy load of beliefs and expectations. It is the difference between experiencing your life and comparing your life to your ideas about how life should be. Take a gentle breath now and notice how thinking about beginner's mind creates a sense of lightness. There is relief in remembering that we do not need to have everything figured out, that it is okay to approach situations with openness rather than certainty. Let us explore this teaching further through another story, one that shows how beginner's mind can change not just our skills, but our relationship with beauty and creation itself. There was once a gardener named Hideo who served at an important family estate. His garden was his pride and his life's work. For 20 years, he had studied the old rules of garden design, traveled to see the great gardens of the land, and perfected his understanding of size, balance, and beauty. Hideo's garden followed all the traditional rules perfectly. The stones were placed according to ancient rules of arrangement. The paths curved in mathematically calculated ways to create the ideal viewing spots. Each tree was trimmed to match the classical ideal for its kind. Moss was encouraged in precisely the right locations. Everything was controlled, balanced, and correct. Visitors would often praise the garden's technical excellence. Garden masters would bring their students to study Hideo's faithful execution of proper design principles. But something bothered Hideo, though he rarely admitted it, even to himself. Despite all its correctness, his garden felt lifeless somehow. It was admirable, but not moving, perfect, but not alive. One autumn, a powerful storm swept through the region. Hideo was traveling to view another garden when the storm hit, and he could not return home for 3 days. When he finally made it back to the estate, he rushed to see what damage the wind and rain had done to his carefully maintained garden. The destruction was extensive. A large branch had broken from the ancient pine tree, falling in a way that blocked the main path. Stones had been shifted from their proper positions by rushing water. Leaves and debris were scattered everywhere. Several carefully trimmed shrubs had grown wild during his absence, sending out branches in directions he would never have allowed. The moss he had so carefully grown in specific areas had spread to unexpected places, and in other spots had been washed away entirely. Hideo sat on a wet stone bench and looked at the chaos, expecting to feel devastated. But instead, something surprising happened. For the first time in years, the garden looked interesting to him, alive. The fallen branch created an unexpected diagonal line that somehow made the space feel more energetic. The shifted stones had formed a new arrangement that was rougher but more natural than his calculated placement. The wild shrub branches reached toward the light in ways that had an organic grace his precise trimming had never achieved. He walked through the transformed garden slowly, seeing it with different eyes. The storm had broken all the rules he followed so carefully, and yet the garden had a vitality now that it had lacked before. Nature had shown him something his expertise had hidden from him. Hideo made a decision that would have shocked his teachers and colleagues. He left most of the storm damage as it was. He worked around the fallen branch rather than removing it. He kept the new stone arrangement. He allowed the shrubs to grow in their wild directions, only trimming what was necessary for the plant's health rather than for beauty. Over the following months, he began changing his entire way of working in the garden. Instead of forcing his perfect vision onto nature, he started working with nature. He would observe how plants naturally wanted to grow and work with those tendencies rather than against them. When moss grew in an unexpected place, he would watch to see if it created something interesting rather than immediately removing it. When a stone settled differently than he had placed it, he would consider whether its new position had its own rightness. The garden master, who had previously praised Hideyo's work, came to visit and was horrified. "What have you done?" he asked. "This garden no longer follows any of the classical principles. That branch should not be lying across the path. Those stones are not in proper relationship to each other. The trimming is all wrong." Hideo smiled gently. "You are right. It no longer follows the rules we were taught. But I have discovered something. The rules were meant to help us create beauty and harmony. But I had become so focused on following the rules that I forgot to actually see whether beauty and harmony were present." He gestured toward the garden. "Now I look at this space with beginner's eyes each day. I do not ask whether something matches classical principles. I ask whether it is alive, whether it invites people to pause and look, whether it feels true. Sometimes the answer matches the traditional rules, and sometimes it does not." The garden master shook his head and left, convinced that Hideo had lost his way. But something different happened over the following year. Visitors to the garden found themselves staying longer, returning more often. They could not always explain why, but the garden moved them in a way that technically perfect gardens did not. It felt real in a way that made them feel more real too. Young gardeners began to seek out Hideo, not to learn the classical rules, but to understand his new approach. He would tell them, "Learn the traditional principles, study them deeply, and practice them faithfully. But do not let your knowledge become a wall between you and what you see. The principles are a finger pointing at the moon of beauty, but if you only look at the finger, you miss the moon entirely." Hideo spent the rest of his life tending that garden, and each season he approached it with beginner's mind, as if seeing it for the first time. Even in winter, when other gardeners saw only bare branches and dead leaves, Hideo would find something that surprised him. The pattern of snow on stones, the way frost turned a spider's web into crystal structure, the stark beauty of a bare tree against a grey sky. His garden became known not for its technical perfection, but for its quality of presence. People said that walking through Hideo's garden made them feel more awake, more aware, more alive to the simple fact of being in a body on earth with plants and stones and sky. This was the true purpose of a garden, and Hideo had discovered it only by letting go of his expertise and remembering how to simply see. This story reveals another dimension of beginner's mind. Hideo, like Takashi, had to move beyond his expertise to find a direct relationship with his work again. His knowledge had become a filter that showed him only whether things matched his ideas, rather than allowing him to experience the actual garden in front of him. This happens to all of us in various ways. We develop ideas about how a good relationship should work, and then we compare our actual relationships to that pattern, rather than experiencing them directly. We form notions about what happiness should feel like, and then we miss the simple contentments that are actually available because they do not match our idea. We gather spiritual knowledge, and then we evaluate our meditation based on whether it matches what we think it should be like, rather than simply being present for what it is. Beginner's mind is the practice of dropping these comparisons and patterns, even just for a moment, and meeting life directly. It does not mean we become foolish or throw away carefulness. Hideo still knew about garden design. Takashi still understood archery, but they learned to hold their knowledge as a tool they could use when appropriate, rather than as a filter that colors everything they saw. As you rest now in this teaching, notice any areas of your life where expertise or accumulated ideas might be blocking your direct experience. You do not need to change anything tonight. Simply recognize the possibility that there might be freshness and surprise available in places where you thought you knew everything already. Zen teaches that the ultimate beginner's mind is to approach your own consciousness this way. Even though you have lived in your mind your entire life, can you encounter your own awareness with fresh curiosity? Can you be present to this moment of breathing, of lying here, of hearing these words as if it were the first moment you had ever experienced anything? This quality of attention naturally brings peace, not because we achieve something or figure something out, but because beginner's mind is restful. It does not carry the weight of all our old certainties and comparisons. It simply meets what is with openness and curiosity. Let this understanding settle in you now like medicine dissolving in water, spreading naturally to where it needs to go. The teaching of beginner's mind will continue to reveal itself in the days to come, showing you places where you might relax your grip on knowing and allow yourself to be surprised by the freshness that is always available when we remember how to see clearly. One of the most profound teachings in Zen Buddhism comes from a very old text called the Heart Sutra. It says something that sounds impossible. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. What does this mean? How can something that clearly exists also be empty? How can emptiness take form? This teaching points to the nature of all things. Nothing exists in a fixed, separate, unchanging way. Everything we see and touch and experience is constantly changing. A tree is made of sunlight, water, soil, air, and time. Take away any of these, and there is no tree. The tree has no separate, independent existence, apart from all the things that create and sustain it. In this sense, it is empty of having a fixed nature. Yet the tree is clearly there. We can see it, touch it, sit under its shade. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. This might seem like a deep idea, but it has immediate practical value. When we understand that nothing has a fixed, permanent identity, we can hold our lives more lightly. We stop clinging so desperately to things that are always changing anyway. We stop demanding that our lives remain frozen in comfortable patterns. We become more flexible, more able to flow with change, more at peace with the basic nature of existence. Let's explore a story that brings this teaching to life. There was a merchant named Yoshida who had built his entire life around trade caravans. For 20 years, he had led mules and horses along mountain routes, carrying tea and silk and pottery between distant cities. His caravan was his pride. He had assembled it slowly over the years, carefully selecting each animal, training them to work together, getting exactly the right number of carrying baskets and rope and protective covers. Yoshida knew every animal in his caravan by its personality and habits. There was the lead mule, who was stubborn but reliable, never slowing down even on the most dangerous paths. There was the young horse who had a gentle nature and carried the most fragile goods. There were the steady middle animals who kept the pace and maintained order. Together, they formed something greater than individual animals. They were his caravan, his livelihood, his identity. He had a specific way of arranging everything. The heavier goods went in particular baskets on particular animals. The delicate items were packed in special padding and positioned in the middle of the line where they would be most protected. The rope that bound everything together was measured and tied in patterns he had perfected over 2 decades. Every piece had its place. Every detail had been refined through years of experience. Other merchants would admire Yoshida's caravan. "Look at how well organized everything is," they would say. "Look at how smoothly the animals move together." This is the model of what a trade caravan should be. Yoshida felt proud of what he had built. This caravan represented his life's work, his skill, his success. One summer, Yoshida was leading his caravan through a high mountain pass when a sudden storm appeared. The sky darkened within minutes, and rain began to fall in heavy sheets. The narrow path became slick with mud. Thunder crashed between the peaks, and lightning split the sky. The animals became frightened and difficult to control. Yoshida tried to calm them, but the lead mule panicked at a particularly loud thunder crack and bolted forward. This startled the other animals, who pushed and jostled each other. In the chaos, several animals slipped on the muddy path. Loads shifted and ropes broke. Within moments, what had been an orderly caravan became complete disorder. Then the worst happened. A section of the mountain path collapsed, weakened by the heavy rain. 3 of Yoshida's animals, along with most of his goods, tumbled down the steep slope. He watched in horror as baskets broke open and goods scattered across the rocky mountainside. The animals were injured, one so badly it could not continue. By the time the storm passed and Yoshida could assess the damage, half his caravan was gone. He managed to get the remaining animals and goods to the next town, but he felt devastated. The caravan he had spent 20 years building, the precise arrangement he had perfected, the specific animals he had trained, all of it was destroyed. He had some animals left, some goods remaining, but it was not his caravan anymore. That perfect thing was gone. Yoshida spent weeks in the town trying to decide what to do. He could not afford to replace everything he had lost. The specific animals were impossible to duplicate. Even if he bought new animals, they would not be the ones he knew so well. Even if he arranged things the same way, it would not be the same caravan. A local tea merchant named Fumiko noticed Yoshida's despair and invited him to share a meal. Over rice and vegetables, Yoshida explained what had happened and why he felt unable to continue his trade. "I understand your loss," Fumiko said. "But tell me, when you first started as a merchant 20 years ago, did you have this exact caravan?" "No, of course not," Yoshida replied. "I started with just 2 animals and a few baskets. And over the years, did the animals change? Did some grow old and need to be replaced? Did you acquire new ones and let others go?" Yoshida thought about this. "Yes, naturally. Animals age and die or become unable to work. I replaced them over time." "And the baskets, the rope, the equipment, did those remain exactly the same for 20 years?" "No. Those wore out and needed replacing regularly. I suppose I replaced almost everything at various times." Fumiko smiled gently. "So, the caravan you lost in the storm was not really the same caravan you started with 20 years ago. None of the original animals were still there. None of the original equipment. Yet you still called it your caravan and thought of it as the same thing." Yoshida sat quietly, beginning to understand what the tea merchant was showing him. "The caravan you are mourning," Fumiko continued, "was never a fixed, permanent thing. It was always changing, always being rebuilt, always becoming something new. What you loved was not the specific animals or equipment. What you loved was the activity of moving goods along mountain paths. What you valued was your skill at organizing and leading. These things are not lost." She poured more tea for both of them. "You can begin again with whatever animals and equipment you can gather. The new caravan will be different from the old one, yes. But the old one was always different from itself, changing every day, never the same from one journey to the next. You just did not notice the constant change because it happened slowly." Yoshida felt something shift in his understanding. He had been thinking of his caravan as a fixed entity, a solid thing that had been destroyed. But Fumiko was showing him that it had never been solid. It had always been a temporary arrangement of elements that came together for a while and then changed and came together differently. Over the following months, Yoshida slowly rebuilt his trading operation. He bought 2 young mules, different in personality from his previous animals. He acquired baskets from local craftspeople in styles different from what he had used before. He learned to work with what was available rather than trying to recreate exactly what had been lost. Something surprising happened. The new caravan worked just as well as the old one. Sometimes better. The younger animals had more energy. The new baskets were actually more durable. The different arrangement of goods he was forced to use because he had fewer animals turned out to be more efficient. One day, about a year after the storm, Yoshida was leading his caravan along a familiar route. Another merchant traveling in the opposite direction stopped to admire his organization. "What a fine caravan you have built," the merchant said. "How long have you been developing this operation?" Yoshida opened his mouth to say 1 year, but then stopped. Was it 1 year since the storm or 20 years since he first started? The animals were new. The equipment was new, the specific arrangement was new, yet his knowledge and skill were the same, accumulated over 2 decades. Which answer was true? "I have been building this caravan my whole life," he finally said, "and I rebuild it every single day." The other merchant looked confused and continued on his way, but Yoshida smiled. He understood now what Fumiko had been teaching him. His caravan was empty of fixed identity, yet it was clearly real and functional. It was constantly disappearing and constantly being reborn. Form was emptiness. Emptiness is form. The caravan existed and did not exist in any permanent way. Both truths were equally valid. This understanding brought Yoshida a peace he had never felt before. He no longer worried so much about losing what he had. How could he lose something that was always changing anyway? He took good care of his animals and equipment, but he did not cling to them desperately. He understood they were temporary arrangements, here for a time and then gone. Like everything else, when young merchants would ask his advice, he would tell them, "Take care of what you have, but hold it lightly. The caravan you build today will not be the same caravan tomorrow, even if nothing dramatic changes. Learn to work with change instead of fighting against it. Learn to see that nothing you own is truly solid or permanent. This understanding will free you from unnecessary suffering." This story shows us the teaching of form and emptiness in a practical way. Yoshida's caravan was real. It existed. It functioned. It carried goods across mountains. But it had no fixed permanent core. It was constantly changing, always empty of any unchanging identity. When he understood this, he could rebuild without being trapped by ideas of what his caravan was supposed to be. This teaching applies to everything in our lives. Our bodies are like the caravan, constantly changing at the cell level, completely different every few years, yet somehow still us. Our relationships are empty of fixed nature, constantly evolving, never the same from one day to the next. Our own sense of self is like this too. Who you were 10 years ago is not who you are now. Yet there is continuity. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. When we truly understand this, we can hold our lives with much less tension. We stop demanding that things remain frozen in comfortable patterns. We become more flexible, more able to adapt to change, more at peace with the flowing nature of existence. Take a breath and notice how this teaching brings a certain lightness. If nothing is fixed and permanent, then you are not trapped in any situation. Everything is always in the process of becoming something else. This is not a sad truth, but a liberating one. Let's explore another story that makes this teaching clearer from a different side, showing how our ideas about where things begin and end are just mental constructions. There was a weaver named Osamu who was known throughout his province for creating the most beautiful cloth. His fabrics had patterns that seemed to shimmer and move, colors that blended in ways other weavers could not duplicate. People would travel for days to ask Osamu to make cloth for special occasions. Osamu took great pride in his finished work. He would spend months on a single piece of cloth, carefully selecting threads, planning complicated patterns, weaving with great attention to every detail. When a piece was complete, he would present it to the customer with a little ceremony, announcing, "This is my finest work. This cloth represents my skill and years of experience." One day, a Zen monk came to Osamu's workshop. The monk had heard of his skill and wanted to ask for a cloth for the temple where he lived. But instead of immediately discussing what kind of cloth he wanted, the monk asked if he could watch Osamu work for a while. Osamu agreed and began work on a new piece. He set up his loom, selected his threads, and began the slow process of weaving. The monk sat quietly nearby, watching with complete attention. After several hours, the monk asked, "Tell me, when does the cloth begin to exist?" Osamu thought this was a strange question, but he answered, "When I finish weaving it. When the last thread is in place and I cut it from the loom, then the cloth exists." The monk nodded, but looked thoughtful. "Show me the threads you will use," he said. Osamu showed him the spools of thread in various colors, all prepared and ready. Are these threads the cloth? The monk asked. No, of course not. They are just threads. They become cloth when I weave them together. I see. And where did these threads come from? From silk merchants. They are made from silk. Can you show me where the silk ends and the thread begins? Osamu picked up a spool and examined it. The silk fibers had been spun together to create thread, but he could not point to any clear boundary where silk stopped being silk and started being thread. The transformation was gradual, a process of spinning and twisting that had no single moment of change. And the silk, the monk continued. Where does it come from? From silkworms, obviously. Can you show me where the silkworm ends and the silk begins? Is the silk part of the worm, or is it separate from the worm? Osamu had never thought about this before. The silk was produced by the silkworm, but was also somehow separate from it. There was no clear boundary. The monk smiled gently. And the silkworm? Where does it come from? What does it need to exist? It needs mulberry leaves to eat, Osamu said, starting to see where this was leading. And the mulberry tree needs soil, water, sunlight. The soil comes from broken down leaves and stones. The water comes from rain, which comes from the ocean, which comes from rivers flowing down from mountains. So when you say you create cloth, the monk said, what exactly are you creating? The cloth is made of threads, which are made of silk, which is made by worms, which eat leaves, which grow on trees, which need soil and water and sun. Where does your cloth actually begin? Can you find the point where it becomes separate from everything else? Osamu sat down slowly, feeling something shift in his understanding. He had always thought of his finished cloth as a separate object, something separate that he created through his skill. But the monk was showing him that the cloth had no clear beginning or end. It was connected to everything. It was empty of any independent existence. The pattern I weave, Osamu said slowly, does that exist separately? Where does the pattern exist? The monk asked. Is it in the threads? If I unweave your cloth and spread out the individual threads, where has the pattern gone? Osamu realized the pattern existed only in the relationship between threads, in their specific arrangement. It was not in any single thread. It was not separate from the threads either. It existed and did not exist both at once. But people can see the cloth, Osamu protested. They can touch it, use it, wear it. It is clearly real. Did I say it was not real? The monk replied, I am simply asking you to look closely at what you mean by real. The cloth functions. It is useful. It is beautiful. But it has no fixed independent existence. It is empty of any permanent core. Yet here it is, functioning perfectly. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. The monk then made his request, asking for a simple cloth in earth colors for meditation cushions at his temple. But before he left, he said something that stayed with Osamu for the rest of his life. You are a skilled weaver. You create beautiful things, but do not be attached to the idea that you are creating something separate and permanent. You are simply arranging conditions in a particular way for a particular time. The cloth will age, fade, eventually return to threads and dust. It was never solid to begin with, but this does not make it less valuable. Understanding emptiness makes things more precious, not less, because we see how temporary and interconnected everything is. After the monk left, Osamu continued his work, but his relationship to it changed completely. He still wove with great care and skill, but he no longer thought of his finished pieces as solid, permanent objects that represented his identity. He saw them as temporary arrangements of conditions, beautiful for a time, and then changing into something else. This understanding brought him great peace. When a piece of cloth he had worked hard on for months was damaged by a careless customer, he did not feel the same devastation he would have felt before. The cloth was changing, as all things change. He had enjoyed the process of creating it, and now it would become something else. Both states were equally valid, equally empty of permanent nature. He began to notice emptiness everywhere. A pot was empty of fixed identity, being clay arranged in a certain shape for a certain time. A house was threads of wood and stone woven together temporarily. Even his own body was like cloth, made of food and water and air, constantly changing, never the same from moment to moment. When students came to learn weaving from Osamu, he would teach them technique and skill, but he would also share what the monk had taught him. "You are not creating separate objects," he would say. "You are participating in the endless flow of conditions, arranging and rearranging themselves. Your cloth is the whole universe temporarily appearing in this form. Treat it with care, but hold it lightly. It is empty of permanent nature, yet it is real and functional. Both truths are equally important." Years later, when Osamu was old and near death, a student asked him what he had learned from a lifetime of weaving. He thought for a long time before answering. "I learned that nothing I made was ever truly mine. I learned that beginning and ending are just ideas we put on continuous processes. I learned that emptiness is not absence but fullness, the infinite potential for things to arise and pass away. Most importantly, I learned that understanding the empty nature of things does not make them less important. It reveals their preciousness because everything is temporary and interconnected. Each moment, each creation, each breath becomes irreplaceable." This story shows us another dimension of form and emptiness. Osamu's cloth was real and useful, but it had no independent existence apart from countless other conditions. When we look closely at anything, we cannot find where it begins or ends. Everything flows into everything else. Nothing exists by itself. This teaching might seem like a deep idea, but it has profound practical effects. When we understand that nothing has fixed, permanent identity, we stop clinging so tightly to things. We stop demanding that life remains still. We become more flexible, more able to flow with change. Understanding emptiness also shows the deep connection of all things. The cloth contains the silkworm, the mulberry tree, the rain, the sun, the entire universe. In the same way, you contain your parents, your food, the air you breathe, the words you have heard, the experiences you have lived. Nothing about you is separate from everything else. This interconnection brings a natural kindness, compassion. When you see that you are not separate from others, that their conditions are your conditions, that harm to them is harm to the whole web of existence you are part of, kindness arises naturally. The teaching that form is emptiness, and emptiness's form also deals with one of our deepest fears. We are afraid of change, afraid that the things and people we love will change and disappear. But when we understand that everything is always already changing, always already empty of fixed nature, this fear loses its power. We are not losing something solid and permanent. We are simply witnessing the natural flow of conditions constantly arranging themselves in new patterns. As you rest in this teaching now, feel how it creates space around your normal way of seeing things. The boundaries you think are solid might be more fluid than you realized. The identity you think is fixed might be more open and changing than you knew. This is not frightening. It is liberating. When you understand that form is emptiness and emptiness is form, you can engage fully with life while holding everything lightly. You can care deeply while knowing nothing lasts forever. You can appreciate beauty while understanding it has no permanent core. This balance between engagement and release is the natural peace that Zen teachings offer. Let this understanding settle in you like rain soaking into earth, working at its own pace, revealing its meaning gradually. The teaching of emptiness is one of the most profound gifts of Buddhist wisdom, and it continues to unfold its meaning throughout a lifetime of practice and reflection. One of the most misunderstood teachings in Zen is also one of the most freeing. The teaching says that ordinary mind is the way. What does this mean? It means that the peace and wisdom you are seeking is not found in special states or dramatic experiences. It is found right here in the simple activities of daily life. Washing dishes, walking down a path, eating a meal, sweeping a floor. These ordinary moments contain everything you are looking for. This teaching challenges our usual beliefs about spiritual growth. We think that enlightenment must be extraordinary, that it requires special practices in special places with special teachers. We imagine it as a peak experience, a moment of huge insight, a dramatic change that lifts us out of ordinary life. But Zen teaches something completely different. The sacred and the ordinary are not separate. They are the same thing seen with different eyes. When you sweep the floor with complete attention, that is meditation. When you eat your meal fully present to the taste and texture, that is spiritual practice. When you walk from one place to another, aware of your feet touching the ground, that is the way. Nothing needs to be added to these simple activities to make them spiritual. They are already complete, just as they are. This does not mean that formal practice is worthless or that we should stop meditation and study. It means that the purpose of formal practice is to help us bring the same quality of attention and presence to our everyday activities. If meditation makes you more peaceful only while you are sitting on the cushion, but you return to stress and anger the moment you stand up, then the practice has not fully taken root. True practice changes how you meet every moment, not just the moments you set aside as special. Let's explore a story that shows how this teaching works in actual life. In a mountain monastery known for its very hard training, there lived a young monk named Tenzo. He had come to the monastery filled with a strong desire for enlightenment. He had read stories of great masters who had experienced sudden awakenings, whose minds had opened to vast understanding in single moments of clarity. This was what Tenzo wanted. He imagined himself sitting in deep meditation, his mind suddenly breaking through to the ultimate truth, his whole being transformed by insight. The monastery had a strict schedule. Each day began at 4 a.m. in the morning with meditation. After meditation came breakfast, then work period, then more meditation, then lunch, then more work, then evening meditation, then bed. This routine repeated day after day, week after week, with very little change. Tenzo threw himself into the meditation periods with intense effort. He would sit on his cushion with fierce concentration, trying to push his mind into the enlightened state he had read about. He wanted the breakthrough, the opening, the dramatic change, but instead, his legs would ache, his back would hurt, and his mind would wander to thoughts about dinner or worries about whether he was practicing correctly. The work periods frustrated him even more. Like all the monks, he was assigned daily chores to maintain the monastery. Some monks worked in the garden, some prepared meals, some repaired buildings. Tenzo's assignment was sweeping. Every day after the morning meditation, he was supposed to sweep the meditation hall, the walkways, the courtyard, and the entrance gate. Tenzo hated sweeping. It seemed like a complete waste of time that could be spent on real practice. He wanted to be meditating, reading sacred texts, receiving teachings from the master. Instead, he was pushing a broom back and forth over the same ground day after day. Nothing about sweeping felt spiritual or transformative. It was just boring, repetitive work that kept him from what he really wanted to be doing. He would rush through his sweeping as quickly as possible, his mind always somewhere else. While sweeping the meditation hall, he would think about the meditation session he had just finished, analyzing what he had done wrong. While sweeping the walkways, he would plan what he would do in the next meditation period to finally achieve the breakthrough he sought. While sweeping the courtyard, he would replay lectures from the master, trying to memorize key points. His sweeping showed his lack of attention. He would miss corners, leave small piles of dust, sometimes sweep dirt from one area only to push it into another area. Other monks occasionally had to re-sweep areas Tenzo had already done because he had rushed through them without really looking at what he was doing. One morning, Tenzo was sweeping the courtyard with his usual hurried, distracted energy when he noticed the senior monk, a very old man named Goro, slowly sweeping the entrance gate area. Tenzo had seen Goro sweep many times, but had never really paid attention. Today, something made him pause and watch. Goro moved very slowly. Each stroke of his broom was deliberate and complete. He would sweep a small section, then pause, look carefully at what he had swept, adjust if needed, and then move to the next section. His face was completely calm, his movements smooth and unhurried. He seemed to be giving the simple act of sweeping his complete attention as if nothing else in the world existed except this broom, this ground, this moment. Tenzo found himself watching for several minutes. There was something compelling about the way the old monk worked. It was just sweeping, the same boring task Tenzo did every day. But somehow when Goro did it, it looked different. It looked almost like meditation, like prayer, like something valuable in itself rather than just a chore to be gotten through as quickly as possible. When Goro finished his section and began walking slowly back toward the buildings, Tenzo approached him. "Uncle Goro," he said, using the respectful term for an elder monk. "I noticed you sweep very slowly. It must take you twice as long as it takes me to finish your area. Why do you not work faster so you can return to meditation or study?" Goro looked at Tenzo with eyes that were gentle but penetrating. "What makes you think I was not meditating while I was sweeping?" he asked. Tenzo was confused. "But you were sweeping. Meditation is sitting on the cushion with eyes closed, watching the breath." "Is it?" Goro said. "Come, show me how you sweep." He handed Tenzo the broom and gestured toward a section of walkway. Tenzo took the broom and began sweeping the way he always did, quickly pushing the broom back and forth while his mind wandered to other things. After a minute, Goro asked him to stop. "Tell me what you just did," he said. "I swept the walkway." "Did you? Where is your attention right now?" Tenzo realized his mind had been thinking about the upcoming meditation period, about a conversation he had had yesterday with another monk, about whether it might rain later. "I suppose my attention was on other things," he admitted. "So, your body swept the walkway, but you were not present for it," Goro said. "You accomplished a task, but you missed the actual experience of accomplishing it. Your mind was everywhere except where you actually were." Goro took the broom back and demonstrated. "Watch carefully," he said. "When I sweep, I am just sweeping. I see the ground in front of me. I feel the weight and movement of the broom. I hear the small sound the bristles make against the stone. I notice where dust has gathered and where the ground is already clean. This is all just sweeping. Nothing extra." He handed the broom back to Tenzo. "Try again, but this time just sweep. Be completely present with the actual activity. Do not think about finishing. Do not plan what you will do next. Do not judge whether this is valuable spiritual practice or just boring work. Simply experience what sweeping actually feels like when you give it your full attention." Tenzo tried again, and this time he made an effort to keep his attention on what he was actually doing. He noticed how the broom felt in his hands. He saw the small particles of dust and leaves being gathered by the bristles. He heard the rhythm of the movement. After just a minute of this kind of attention, something unexpected happened. He felt his mind settle into a quality of calm that he had been struggling to find during his intense meditation sessions. "You see," Goro said, "ordinary mind is the way. This means that washing dishes is the way. Sweeping is the way. Walking is the way. Eating is the way. Everything you do is an opportunity for complete presence. When you are sweeping, just sweep. When you are sitting, just sit. When you are eating, just eat. Nothing needs to be added to these activities to make them spiritual. They are already complete." Goro started to walk away, then turned back. "You are searching for enlightenment as if it was something far away that requires special effort to reach. But what if enlightenment is just being completely present for your actual life as it unfolds moment by moment. What if the dramatic breakthrough you are seeking is simply this: being fully awake to sweeping when you sweep, fully awake to sitting when you sit, fully awake to living when you live? Over the following weeks, Tenzo began to practice what Goro had shown him. He stopped rushing through his sweeping. He gave it the same careful attention he tried to give to meditation, and a remarkable thing happened. The sweeping itself became peaceful. He would sometimes find himself so absorbed in the simple activity that time would seem to disappear. His mind would be quiet and clear in a way that all his intense meditation effort had not achieved. He began to notice this quality of presence spreading to other activities. When he ate, he tasted his food fully. When he walked, he felt each step. When he sat in meditation, he was more genuinely present because he had been practicing presence during every activity throughout the day. Years later, when Tenzo had become a teacher himself, students would ask him about the path to enlightenment. He would tell them, "Start with whatever you are doing right now. If you are washing a bowl, wash it with complete attention. If you are walking to the meditation hall, walk with full presence. Do not wait for some future moment when you will finally be spiritual enough to be enlightened. This moment, this activity, this simple ordinary experience, this is the way. Not something special that happens after years of effort, but this right here, right now." This story shows us what ordinary mind means in practice. Tenzo was seeking enlightenment as something extraordinary, while missing the fact that complete presence in any activity is itself the awakening he sought. The work he thought was keeping him from real practice was actually the perfect opportunity for practice. This teaching transforms how we approach our entire lives. We do not need to wait for special conditions to begin really living. We do not need to escape from ordinary life to find peace. We just need to be fully present for the life we already have. The dishes that need washing, the floor that needs sweeping, the food that needs eating. These simple activities done with complete attention are not obstacles to practice. They are the practice itself. Take a breath and notice how this teaching creates a sense of relief. You do not need to become someone special or do something extraordinary to live a spiritual life. You just need to show up fully for whatever is actually here right now. The way is not far away. It is in your next breath, your next step, your next simple action. Let's explore another story that shows this teaching from a different side, revealing what happens when someone tries to find enlightenment by escaping from ordinary life rather than embracing it. High in the mountains, there was a remote cave that had been used for meditation by hermits for hundreds of years. A monk named Eshin had heard stories about this cave and the powerful experiences seekers had there. He decided to leave his monastery and spend 3 years in solitary retreat, meditating continuously until he achieved complete enlightenment. Eshin made the difficult journey up the mountain and found the cave. It was simple but adequate. There was space for sitting, a small area for sleeping, protection from rain and wind. A nearby spring provided water, and villagers from below would occasionally bring rice and vegetables, leaving them at the cave entrance for whatever hermit was in residence. Eshin began his retreat with great determination. He would sit for hours in meditation, sleep only a few hours each night, eat very little, and devote himself completely to inner development. He had no distractions here, no other people to deal with, no work assignments to interrupt his practice, no schedule except the one he created for himself. This, he thought, was the ideal condition for achieving enlightenment. Months passed. Eshin's meditation deepened. He began to experience states of profound calm and clarity. His mind would become very still, and he would feel himself dissolving into a sense of vast openness. These experiences were unlike anything he had known at the monastery. He felt certain he was making real progress toward ultimate awakening. After 3 years, Eshin felt transformed. His mind was much quieter than it had been. He could sit in meditation for many hours without discomfort. He had insights into the nature of consciousness that seemed profound and true. He felt peaceful in a way he had never experienced before. He decided it was time to return to the world and share what he had learned. The journey down the mountain was easy compared to the journey up 3 years earlier. Eshin walked with a sense of lightness and confidence. He had achieved what he set out to achieve. He was enlightened, or at least much closer to enlightenment than most people. He looked forward to returning to his monastery and perhaps becoming a teacher. When he reached the first village at the base of the mountain, everything seemed overwhelming. After 3 years of silence and solitude, the noise of people talking felt almost violent. Children running and shouting irritated him. The smell of cooking food, which would have been pleasant before his retreat, now seemed too strong. He found himself becoming tense and uncomfortable. He stayed in the village for one night at a small inn. The innkeeper was friendly but talkative, asking many questions about Eshin's retreat. Eshin tried to maintain his peaceful state while answering, but he found himself becoming annoyed at the interruptions to his inner calm. By the time he went to bed, he noticed his jaw was clenched and his shoulders were tight with tension. The next day, he continued toward his original monastery. The road took him through a busy market town. Here, the sensory overload was even worse. Merchants shouting about their goods, people bargaining and arguing, animals being led through crowded streets, the press of bodies, the chaos of commercial life. Eshin felt his carefully cultivated peace beginning to crumble. At one point, someone bumped into him roughly without apologizing. Eshin felt a flash of anger rise in his chest. Another person stepped on his foot in the crowd. More anger. A merchant tried to sell him something aggressively. Eshin snapped at the man with irritation. Within an hour of being in the market town, he felt more agitated than he had before his 3-year retreat. By the time he reached his monastery, Eshin was exhausted and confused. How could this be happening? He had spent 3 years developing deep peace and clarity. He had experienced profound states in meditation. Yet here in normal life, dealing with ordinary people and situations, that peace disappeared almost immediately. The slightest inconvenience triggered irritation. The smallest distraction destroyed his calm. Eshin went to see his old teacher, a master named Ryanan. He explained his confusion. I spent 3 years in deep practice. I experienced such profound peace in the cave. But now that I am back in the world, I find I am more easily upset than I was before I left. What went wrong? Did I waste 3 years? Ryanan listened carefully and then said something that struck Eshin like a bell. The cave was like a greenhouse where you grew a delicate plant. The plant thrived in those perfect controlled conditions. But you never tested whether it could survive in the actual environment where it needs to live. You developed a peace that only works in silence and solitude. But what good is peace that falls apart the moment someone bumps into you? The master continued. Spiritual practice is not about learning to be calm in perfect conditions. It is about learning to remain centered in the middle of actual life, with all its noise and difficulty and unpredictability. The marketplace is a better test of your development than the cave ever was. Right now, the marketplace is showing you that your peace was conditional. It depended on everything being quiet and simple. Ryanan stood and gestured for Eshin to follow him. They walked through the monastery to where monks were doing their daily work. Some were cooking in the kitchen, laughing and talking while they chopped vegetables. Others were repairing a fence, working together, and calling out instructions to each other. In the garden, monks were pulling weeds while discussing plans for the autumn planting. Look at these monks, Ryanan said. They are not in caves having profound experiences. They are doing ordinary work, dealing with each other's personalities, handling practical problems. But watch carefully. See how Brother Tendo laughs genuinely while stirring the soup. See how Sister Natsumi remains patient, even though she has to explain the same thing 3 times to a new monk. See how Brother Cho continues working steadily, even when the tool he needs keeps being borrowed by others. Ryanan turned to face Eshin directly. This is where real practice happens. Not in perfect conditions where everything is controlled, but in the messy reality of living with others, handling responsibilities, meeting difficulties. The peace you are looking for is not the peace of escape. It is the peace that can exist right in the middle of ordinary life. He placed a hand on Eshin's shoulder. Your 3 years were not wasted. You learned important things about your mind and developed valuable skills. But now the real practice begins. You need to learn to bring that quality of presence and awareness into your regular activities. Can you remain centered while cooking a meal with others? Can you stay peaceful when plans change unexpectedly? Can you maintain awareness while having a frustrating conversation? Over the following months, Eshin discovered that Rhiannon was right. Learning to be peaceful while sitting alone in silence was just the beginning. Learning to be peaceful while living a normal life was much harder and much more valuable. He had to develop a new kind of practice, one that worked in the middle of noise and distraction and other people's needs. He began to understand what ordinary mind is the way really meant. It did not mean that meditation and retreat were worthless. It meant that the test of real development was whether your practice improved your regular life. Could you wash dishes with the same presence you brought to meditation? Could you have a difficult conversation with the same centeredness you found in silence? Could you handle disappointment with the same calmness you experienced in solitude? Gradually, Eshin developed a practice that worked in ordinary conditions. He learned that the path was not about escaping to caves, but about waking up to the life that was actually here. Cooking meals, cleaning rooms, talking with other monks, dealing with irritations and difficulties. This was the real spiritual path. Not something separate from life, but life itself met with complete presence and awareness. Years later, when students would ask Eshin about retreat practice and whether they should spend years in solitary meditation, he would say, "Retreat can be valuable for developing certain skills and deepening your practice. But remember that the goal is not to become good at retreat. The goal is to become good at life. Your practice must work in the marketplace, in the kitchen, in conversation, in difficulty. If your peace only exists when everything is perfect, it is not real peace. Real peace lives in the middle of ordinary life, available in every moment, whether that moment is pleasant or difficult, quiet or noisy, simple or complicated." This story shows another dimension of the ordinary mind teaching. Eshin's 3 years of retreat gave him genuine experiences and skills, but they did not teach him the most important thing. True practice means being fully present for actual life, not escaping into special conditions. The cave was like training wheels that needed to eventually come off. The real path is learning to ride the bicycle on actual roads with actual traffic. This teaching challenges the common belief that we need to get away from ordinary life to develop spiritually. We think we need to retreat to quiet places, avoid difficulties, simplify everything. But Zen teaches that difficulty and complexity and other people are not obstacles to practice. They are the practice. Every challenging situation is an opportunity to remain centered. Every difficult person teaches us about patience. Every ordinary task done with complete attention is meditation. Understanding this brings profound relief. We do not need to escape from our lives to find peace. We do not need special conditions or perfect circumstances. We just need to show up fully for whatever is actually here. The dishes in your sink, the floor that needs cleaning, the person you need to talk to, the problem you need to solve. These are not keeping you from spiritual life. They are your spiritual life. If you meet them with presence and awareness, as you rest now in this teaching, feel how it removes the burden of thinking you need to be somewhere else, doing something else to be on the spiritual path. You are already on the path. Every moment offers the opportunity for complete presence. Every activity can be done with the quality of attention that transforms it into practice. The way is not far away in some special place or future time. The way is here in your breathing right now, in the feeling of your body resting, in the simple fact of being alive in this moment. This ordinary experience, nothing special, nothing extraordinary. This is what you have been seeking. Not something to achieve in the future, but something to recognize right here, right now, in the middle of your perfectly ordinary life. When you wake tomorrow and begin your day, remember this teaching. Whatever you do first, whether it is making tea or washing your face or getting dressed, do it with complete attention. Be fully present for that simple, ordinary activity. This is the practice. This is the way. Not something added to life, but life itself met with full awareness. In this meeting, the sacred and the ordinary reveal themselves as one thing. And that revelation brings the peace that has been available all along. There is a Zen teaching that is so simple it seems almost strange at first. The teaching is just this. Nothing more needs to be said, just this. This moment, this breath, this experience exactly as it is. Not some improved version of this moment, not this moment plus some special understanding or achievement. Just this, complete and sufficient, exactly as it is. Our minds resist this teaching because it seems too simple to be true. We think spiritual awakening must be something more than just this ordinary moment. We think peace must be something we add to our current experience, some quality we develop or state we achieve. But Zen teaches that this searching for something more is itself the problem. The peace we seek is not found by adding anything to this moment. It is found by fully receiving this moment exactly as it already is. Let's explore a story that shows what this teaching looks like in actual experience. There was a merchant named Saburo who spent his life traveling between cities, buying and selling goods. He worked hard and was successful by most standards. He had enough money to live comfortably. He had respect in his community. He had built a business that supported his family well. But Saburo was not happy. No matter what he achieved, it never felt like enough. When he made a successful trade, he would feel satisfied for a few hours, but then his mind would turn to the next deal he needed to make. When he reached one city, he would already be thinking about the next destination. When he had a pleasant meal, he would barely taste it because his thoughts were on the negotiations he needed to handle tomorrow. Saburo felt like he was always chasing something just out of reach. He told himself that once he saved enough money, he would finally relax and enjoy life. Once he established his business in 3 more cities, then he would have peace of mind. Once he secured the big contracts he was pursuing, then he could stop worrying and be content. But every goal he reached just revealed another goal beyond it. The amount of money that once seemed like it would bring security now seemed insufficient. The business success he had achieved felt like it needed to be expanded further. The satisfaction he expected to feel kept receding like the horizon. Always visible, but never reachable. One day, Saburo was traveling alone on a mountain road when a storm appeared suddenly. The rain came down in sheets, and the path became slippery and dangerous. Saburo looked for shelter and saw a small shrine set back from the road among some trees. He ran to it and found the covered entrance provided protection from the rain. The storm was fierce and showed no sign of ending quickly. Saburo realized he would be stuck here for a while. He felt frustrated at the delay. He had planned to reach the next town by evening to meet with a supplier. Now he would miss the meeting and have to rearrange his schedule. He sat under the shrine roof, watching the rain and thinking about all the ways this delay would complicate his plans. As he sat there, he gradually became aware of his surroundings in a way he usually did not. He had been so focused on his frustration that he had not really looked at where he was. The shrine was simple but beautiful, with old wood carved in traditional patterns. The trees around it were ancient and thick, their leaves creating a canopy that danced in the wind. The sound of rain on leaves and on the shrine roof created a complex rhythm that was somehow soothing. Saburo found himself watching a single drop of water as it formed on the edge of the roof, grew slowly larger, and finally fell to the stone step below. He watched another drop form and fall, and another. There was something mesmerizing about this simple process. Form, grow, fall, form, grow, fall. Nothing more than that, yet somehow complete and satisfying to watch. As he sat there watching the rain, something unexpected happened. His thinking about the missed meeting began to fade. His planning about how to rearrange his schedule grew quieter. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he was simply present, sitting under a shrine roof, watching rainfall with nothing to do and nowhere to be until the storm passed. He noticed he was breathing. This obvious fact somehow felt surprising. His breath was moving in and out, and he had not been paying any attention to it. He took a deeper breath and felt it fill his lungs, then released it and felt the relaxation that came with the exhale. He took another breath and another, just breathing and watching rain. A bird appeared in the branches above, shaking water from its feathers. Saburo watched it carefully arrange itself on a branch, tuck its head under its wing, and settle into stillness. The bird was not worried about the rain or frustrated about the delay to its activities. It was simply being a bird in rain, finding shelter and waiting. Time passed in a way that felt different from usual. Saburo was not checking how long he had been there or calculating how much longer the storm might last. He was just sitting, breathing, watching, being present for this moment of sheltering from rain. There was nothing special about it, nothing extraordinary, just a man sitting under a shrine roof while rain fell. Yet somehow it felt more real, more alive, more satisfying than any of the exciting business dealings he normally considered important. When the rain finally stopped and Saburo continued on his way, something had shifted in him. He could not have explained exactly what had changed, but he felt lighter somehow, less burdened by the constant pressure of getting to the next thing, more aware of the actual experience of walking on this path, feeling the cool air after the rain, seeing the way water drops caught light on the leaves. He reached the town too late for his meeting, as expected, but instead of feeling frustrated, he found himself curious about what would happen now that his plans had changed. He went to a small inn, ordered a simple meal, and ate it with real attention to the taste and texture. He slept well that night, and in the morning he rearranged his schedule without the usual anxiety about whether everything would work out. Over the following weeks, Saburo found himself remembering the time under the shrine roof. That simple experience of just sitting, just being present with rain and breath and the moment exactly as it was. He began to wonder if this quality of presence might be available not just when he was forced to stop by a storm, but in the middle of his regular activities. He started practicing bringing his attention to the actual experience of whatever he was doing. When walking, he would notice the feeling of his feet on the ground. When eating, he would actually taste his food. When talking to someone, he would really listen instead of planning what to say next. When sitting, he would feel himself sitting. What he discovered surprised him. He had spent his whole life believing that satisfaction was somewhere ahead in some future achievement. But when he brought his full attention to this moment exactly as it was, he found a quality of contentment that did not depend on anything being different. Not permanent happiness or constant joy, but a simple sufficiency. This moment, this breath, this experience, just this, and it was enough. Saburo's business continued much as before. He still worked hard and made deals and traveled between cities, but he was not waiting for some future moment to finally be at peace. He had discovered that peace was available right here, in the middle of his regular life. Whenever he remembered to simply be present for what was actually happening, when people would ask him about his work and whether he had achieved his goals, he would say something that puzzled them. I am still working toward various goals, but I have stopped believing that reaching them will give me something I do not already have. What I was seeking was never in the future. It was here all along. I just needed to stop long enough to notice. This story shows us what just this means in practical terms. Saburo spent years chasing future satisfaction while missing the actual experience of his life as it unfolded. A forced stop in a rainstorm gave him a glimpse of what it feels like to be fully present for a simple moment, and this glimpse changed how he related to his entire life. The teaching of just this is not telling us to stop having goals or working toward things. It is showing us that the real life we are living is happening right now, not in some imagined future. When we fully receive this moment, we discover it has a completeness we never noticed when we were treating it as just a stepping stone to somewhere else. This teaching brings natural peace because it releases us from the exhausting pattern of constantly reaching for the next thing. We can still work and plan and move toward goals, but we are not postponing our actual experience of being alive until those goals are reached. We are living now, fully present for this breath, this step, this moment exactly as it is. Take a breath and notice how this teaching feels. Just this breath, just this moment of your body resting, just this simple experience of being alive. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing is lacking. Just this. Let's explore another story that shows this teaching from a different angle, revealing what happens when someone spends their life searching for something they already have. In a village near the coast, there lived a fisherman named Hideki, who had inherited a beautiful boat from his father. The boat was well made and perfectly suited for the waters where Hideki fished. It had everything he needed: good, strong wood, a reliable sail, space for his nets and catch. For years, Hideki made his living from this boat, going out each day and returning with fish to sell. But Hideki had heard stories about a legendary boat maker who lived somewhere along the coast. According to the stories, this master craftsman built boats that were so perfect they practically sailed themselves. Fishermen who owned these boats supposedly caught more fish with less effort and never encountered trouble on the water. The boats were said to be works of art with every detail perfected. Hideki became obsessed with the idea of finding this master craftsman and commissioning one of these perfect boats. He imagined how much better his life would be once he had the right boat. His fishing would be easier, more profitable. He would be respected as someone who owned a truly fine vessel. Everything about his work would be improved. He began asking every traveling merchant and visiting fisherman if they had heard of this master boatmaker. Everyone had heard the stories, but no one knew exactly where the craftsman lived. Some said he was 3 days north along the coast. Others said he was a week south. Some claimed he only built boats for certain people and could not be commissioned. Others said he had died years ago, or perhaps had never existed at all. This uncertainty only made Hideki more determined. He decided he would search along the coast until he found this master or proved he did not exist. He left his village and began traveling, stopping at every coastal settlement to ask about the legendary boat maker. Months passed. Hideki traveled far from home, always hearing that the master was just a bit further in one direction or another. He ran out of money and had to work at odd jobs to continue his search. He would take temporary work as a deckhand or helping to repair nets, always asking if anyone knew where the master craftsman could be found. Meanwhile, Hideki's original boat sat unused at the dock in his home village. His family cared for it, keeping it in good condition, hoping Hideki would return and resume his fishing. But he did not return. He was too focused on finding the perfect boat to appreciate the perfectly good boat he already owned. 3 years passed this way. Hideki had traveled the entire coastline, worked dozens of temporary jobs, asked hundreds of people about the master boatmaker. He had heard countless versions of the legend, but had never found anyone who could tell him definitively where the craftsman was, or even if he still lived. Finally, exhausted and discouraged, Hideki gave up his search. He had no money left and no energy to continue. He decided to return home, accept that he would never have the perfect boat, and try to rebuild his life. The journey home took several weeks. When Hideki finally walked into his village, his family greeted him with tears of relief and joy. They had worried about him constantly during his 3-year absence. They took him to his old house, gave him food and rest, and slowly he began to recover from his long journey. After a few days, Hideki went down to the dock to see his old boat. He had left it behind thinking it was inadequate, just a simple fishing boat compared to the legendary perfect vessel he sought. But when he saw it again after 3 years away, something shifted in his perception. The boat was beautiful. The wood had aged well and had a warm color in the morning light. The lines of its construction were clean and strong. The sail was neatly folded, ready to catch wind. Everything about it was well made and functional. It was not a legendary boat built by a famous master, but it was a fine boat built by his skilled father. It was completely sufficient for everything he needed to do. Hideki climbed into the boat and sat there for a long time. He ran his hands over the wood, feeling the smooth surfaces his father had sanded carefully. He looked at the joints and saw how precisely they fit together. He examined the sail and appreciated its sturdy weaving. Every part of this boat had been made with care and skill. It lacked nothing that was actually necessary. He realized he had spent 3 years chasing a fantasy while this real good boat sat waiting for him. He had treated it as inadequate because he had convinced himself that somewhere else something better existed. But what if there was no perfect boat? What if this boat, the one he actually had, was exactly what he needed? Over the following weeks, Hideki returned to fishing. As he worked with his boat again, he began to notice things he had never appreciated before. The way it handled in different conditions, how well balanced it was, the clever design choices his father had made. This boat, which he had dismissed as ordinary, was actually quite remarkable when he paid attention to it. One day, an old fisherman from a neighboring village came to admire Hideki's boat. "This is fine work," the old man said, running his hand along the rail. "Your father built this, did he not? He was one of the best craftsmen I ever knew. Some people used to call him the master boat maker of this region." Hideki felt something click into place in his mind. "What did you call him?" he asked. "The master boat maker." He had no formal title, but everyone who knew boats recognized his skill. People would travel from other villages hoping to commission work from him. Hideki started laughing, first quietly and then more fully. He had spent 3 years searching for a legendary master craftsman, while his own father's boat, built by exactly such a craftsman, sat waiting for him. The perfect boat he had been seeking was the boat he already owned. He had been chasing stories about something that was already his. The old fisherman looked confused by Hideki's laughter, but Hideki just shook his head and said, "I learned something important. Sometimes what we are looking for is what we already have. We just do not see it because we are too busy looking somewhere else." From that day forward, Hideki fished from his father's boat with deep appreciation. Every time he went out on the water, he felt grateful for this vessel that had always been sufficient, that had always been exactly what he needed. He had wasted 3 years searching for something better, but that waste had taught him something valuable. The perfection he sought was not in some distant place or future acquisition. It was here now, in what he already had, when he stopped taking it for granted. When younger fishermen would complain about their boats and dream of better vessels, Hideki would tell them his story. "You can spend your life dreaming of the perfect boat," he would say, "or you can appreciate the good boat you have. The first path leads to constant searching and dissatisfaction. The second path leads to contentment and gratitude. The choice is yours." This story shows another dimension of the just this teaching. Hideki spent years searching for something perfect while missing the fact that what he already had was more than adequate. His search for something better prevented him from appreciating something good. We all do this in various ways. We think we need different circumstances, better conditions, more perfect situations before we can finally be satisfied. We treat what we have as temporary and insufficient, always looking towards some imagined improvement. But what if what we have right now is actually enough? What if this life, this moment, this experience, just as it is, contains everything we truly need? The teaching of just this invites us to stop and really look at what is already here. Not with judgment about whether it measures up to some ideal, but with genuine attention to what is actually present. When we do this, we often discover that what seemed ordinary is actually remarkable. What seemed insufficient is actually plenty. What seemed temporary and unimportant is actually the only real life we have. This teaching does not mean we never change anything or work to improve situations. It means we stop postponing our appreciation of life until everything is perfect. We stop treating this moment as inadequate compared to some imagined better moment. We recognize that this is it. This is the life we are actually living. Not some future improved version, but this one, right here, right now. Understanding this brings profound peace. The restless searching that drives so much of our worry comes from the belief that what we need is somewhere else. But when we discover that what we need is here, the searching can stop. Not because we have given up or become passive, but because we have recognized what is actually true. This moment, just as it is enough. Not perfect, not ideal, but sufficient, complete in itself. As you rest now in this teaching, feel how it settles into your body. Just this breath, just this moment of resting, just this simple experience of being alive. You do not need to add anything or change anything for this moment to be complete. It already is complete. You have already arrived at the place you were seeking. You just needed to stop looking elsewhere long enough to notice where you actually are. The teaching of just this is the completion of all the other teachings we have explored. Beginner's mind helps us see this moment fresh. The gateless gate shows us we are already here. Form and emptiness reveals the nature of what is here. Not knowing keeps us open to this moment as it actually is. Ordinary mind shows us that this simple moment is the path itself. And just this brings it all together with the recognition that nothing is lacking. Nothing needs to be added. This is enough. Let this understanding continue to work in you. You might find yourself noticing moments throughout your day when you stop reaching for something else and simply receive what is already here. You might discover that the satisfaction you seek is closer than you realized. Not in some future achievement, but in fuller presence for the life you are already living. This is the gift of Zen teaching. Not something far away to strive toward, but something always available when we remember to simply be here for this. Just this, exactly as it is. In a farming village at the edge of vast rice fields, there lived two neighbors whose houses stood side by side. The first man, whose name was Junichi, owned considerable land. His rice fields were extensive and productive. His house was large and well maintained. He had sturdy farm equipment, several strong oxen, and enough workers to help with the harvest. By any measure, Junichi was wealthy and his life was comfortable. The second man, whose name was Tomio, owned only a small plot of land. His house was simple, just 3 rooms with a straw roof that needed frequent repair. He had no oxen, no workers, and his equipment was old and worn. He worked his small field alone, and while he always had enough rice to eat, there was rarely anything extra to sell. By any measure, Tomio was poor, and his life was difficult. Yet, if you watched these two men, you would see something that did not match their circumstances. Junichi, despite his wealth and comfort, always seemed dissatisfied. He would walk through his extensive fields and notice only the sections where the rice was not growing as well as he wanted. He would look at his large house and think about the additional rooms he should build. He would count his oxen and consider how many more he would need to expand his operations further. When talking with other farmers, Junichi would always turn the conversation to what he lacked. "My southern field does not produce as much as my northern one," he would say. "I need to find better seed varieties. My equipment is aging and will need replacement soon. It is so difficult to find reliable workers these days." Tomio, despite his poverty and hard life, seemed somehow content. He would work his small field with steady attention, not rushing but not wasting time either. When the rice grew well, he would smile and feel grateful. When difficulties came, he would address them practically without complaint. His simple house was always clean and well organized. His few possessions were cared for with respect. When talking with other farmers, Tomio would often speak of simple pleasures. "The morning air was particularly clear today," he might say. I could see all the way to the mountains, or my neighbor shared some pickled vegetables yesterday. The radishes were especially good, or I repaired my roof in the section that was leaking. Now the rain stays outside where it belongs. This difference between the two neighbors puzzled everyone in the village. How could the wealthy man seem so burdened while the poor man seemed so light? What did Tomio have that Junichi lacked? One day, a traveling monk came through the village and stopped to rest at the small shrine near where Junichi and Tomio lived. Both men noticed the monk and brought him offerings. Junichi brought expensive rice cakes from the town market. Tomio brought a simple bowl of rice from his own harvest and some water from his well. The monk accepted both offerings with equal gratitude. As he ate, he talked with the two men, asking them about their lives. Junichi immediately began listing his concerns and problems: the challenges of managing large fields, the difficulty of finding good workers, the need to constantly expand to stay ahead of other farmers who were also expanding, the burden of maintaining so much equipment and property. When the monk asked Tomio about his life, the simple farmer thought for a moment and then said, I work my field. I repair my house. I have enough to eat. When the weather is good, I appreciate it. When difficulties come, I deal with them. I cannot complain. The monk smiled and said, Tell me, Junichi, when you walk through your extensive fields, what do you see? I see sections that need improvement, Junichi replied. Areas where the rice is not as thick as it should be, corners where weeds are growing, problems that need to be addressed. And you, Tomio, when you work in your small field, what do you see? I see rice growing, Tomio said simply. I see the result of my work and the gift of good soil and rain. I see what I will eat in the coming months. The monk nodded. Junichi, you have much land, but you see only what is lacking in it. Tomio, you have little land, but you see what it actually provides. Junichi, you have a large house, but you think about the rooms that are not yet built. Tomio, you have a simple house, but you appreciate the shelter it gives you. He stood up and prepared to continue his journey. Before leaving, he said something that would stay with both men. Wealth and poverty are not determined by how much you have. They are determined by how you see what you have. A man with vast fields who only notices what is wrong is poor. A man with a small field who sees what it provides is rich. The treasure you seek is not in acquiring more. It is in recognizing the value of what is already here. After the monk left, Junichi could not stop thinking about his words. That evening, instead of making his usual mental list of problems and necessary improvements, he tried something different. He walked through his fields and deliberately looked for what was actually there rather than what was missing. He saw rice plants standing thick and green, row after row stretching across the land. He saw irrigation channels carrying water to where it was needed. He saw rich soil that his family had tended for generations. He saw the evening light making the whole field glow gold. When he really looked at what was there instead of what was lacking, he felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Over the following days, Junichi continued this practice. Instead of walking through his house thinking about additions he wanted to build, he noticed the solid construction, the rooms that kept his family dry and comfortable, the sturdy beams his grandfather had installed. Instead of counting his oxen and wishing for more, he appreciated their strength and health, the way they reliably did the heavy work that would be impossible without them. This shift in attention did not change his circumstances at all. He still had the same land, the same house, the same equipment. But his experience of having these things transformed completely. What had felt like barely enough when he was focused on what was missing now felt abundant when he paid attention to what was actually present. One morning, Junichi was working near the boundary between his land and Tomio's small plot. He watched his neighbor working steadily in the small field, and he realized something. Tomio had been wealthy all along, not in possessions, but in his ability to see the richness in what he had. This was a skill, a way of paying attention, and it was more valuable than all the land and equipment Junichi owned. Junichi called out a greeting to his neighbor. "Tomio, may I ask you something?" The simple farmer stopped his work and came to the boundary. "Of course. I have noticed that you seem content even though your circumstances are difficult. How do you maintain this contentment? What is your secret?" Tomio looked surprised by the question. He thought for a while before answering. "I do not know if I have a secret. I simply try to see what is actually here. I have a field that gives me rice. I have a house that keeps me dry. I have my health and my strength. I have neighbors who are kind. When I work, I pay attention to the work. When I eat, I taste my food. When I rest, I feel the rest. I suppose I just try to be present for my actual life instead of comparing it to some other life I imagine." He paused and then added, "I do not have much, so I cannot afford to miss what I do have. Perhaps this is the gift of having little. It teaches you to notice and appreciate everything." Junichi felt humbled. He had spent years accumulating more land, more equipment, more of everything, thinking this would bring him satisfaction. But he had never learned to actually appreciate what he had. He was always focused on the next thing to get, the next expansion, the next improvement. He had vast fields, but missed the miracle of rice growing. He had a large house, but did not feel the shelter it provided. He had much, but he experienced little of it, because his attention was always somewhere else. "Thank you," Junichi said to his neighbor. "You have taught me something more valuable than all my land." From that day forward, Junichi's relationship with his life changed. He still worked hard and managed his land well, but he stopped treating each moment as insufficient compared to some imagined better moment. He began each day by noticing 3 things he was grateful for. While working, he would pause occasionally to actually see what was around him, rather than just thinking about what needed to be done next. While eating, he tasted his food. While sitting in his house in the evening, he felt the comfort of shelter and rest. His circumstances barely changed, but his experience transformed completely. He felt wealthier with this new way of paying attention than he had ever felt with all his possessions. The richness was not in having more. It was in fully receiving what was already here. Years later, when young farmers would ask Junichi for advice about success, he would tell them about the day the monk visited and what he learned from his neighbor Tomio. "You can spend your life acquiring more and more, but if you do not learn to truly see and appreciate what you have, you will always feel poor. The first step is not to get more. The first step is to fully receive what is already here." He would gesture toward his extensive fields. "I am grateful for all of this, but I was more miserable when I first acquired it than I am now. And nothing about the land has changed. What changed was my ability to see it. Wealth is not a quantity of possessions, it is a quality of attention." This story reveals something important about the teaching of just this. The richness we seek is not in having more. It is in fully experiencing what we already have. Junichi had everything he needed for comfort and safety. But he felt poor because his attention was always on what was missing. Tomio had very little, but he felt rich because he fully appreciated what was present. This teaching does not ask us to pretend we are satisfied when we are genuinely lacking something essential. But it does ask us to look honestly at whether our sense of lack is real or created by our habits of comparison and constant wanting of more. Most of us, if we are truly honest, have enough of what we actually need. We have shelter, food, the basic requirements for life. We may not have everything we want, and we may have real difficulties and challenges. But when we bring our attention fully to what is actually here, we often discover a sufficiency we had not noticed. As you settle more deeply now, feel how your body knows how to rest without being told. Your breath continues without your management. Your heart beats without your effort. There is a natural wisdom in your body that knows exactly what to do when you stop interfering with it. This same natural wisdom is available for your mind as well. When you stop trying so hard to control and understand and figure everything out, Your mind settles into its own natural clarity. The teachings we have explored tonight are ancient, passed down through hundreds of generations of practitioners who found them valuable and true. They have survived because they point towards something real about human experience, something that does not change even as centuries pass. The same peace available to monks in mountain monasteries 1,000 years ago is available to you right here, right now, in whatever circumstances you find yourself. You do not need to go anywhere or become anyone to access this peace. You simply need to stop, look, and recognize what is already present. The breath moving, the body resting, the awareness that knows its own experience. Just this, nothing lacking, nothing to add, already complete. Let yourself rest in this completeness. Now there is nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you need to understand, no one else you need to become. This moment, exactly as it is with all its simplicity and ordinariness, is enough. Here is enough. The wisdom of these teachings will continue to work in you long after this night ends. You may find yourself seeing situations with fresh eyes. You may notice moments when you recognize you are already where you want to be. You may discover that simple activities done with full attention bring unexpected peace. These are not things you need to make happen. They will arise naturally like plants growing from seeds that have been planted in fertile soil. For now, let everything settle. Let the teachings rest in you the way rain soaks into earth, finding its own way to where it needs to go. Trust the natural wisdom of your body and mind to keep what is valuable and let go of what is not needed. Sleep well, knowing that the peace you seek is not something you lack. It is something you are remembering how to recognize, and it has been here with you every moment, even when you could not see it. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.